The quilted fabric passed through her fingers one last time, and Nora Garrett knew she would never feel its weight again. She stood in the dusty street of Eagle Pass, Texas, in the blazing heat of July 1878, holding the last thing of value she owned besides the threadbare dress on her back and the hollow-eyed daughter clinging to her skirts. The quilt had been her grandmother's handiwork, stitched with love during winter evenings in Virginia before the war had changed everything. Blue and white squares formed a pattern called wedding ring, each circle interlocking with the next in an endless promise of unity. Nora remembered tracing those patterns as a child, dreaming of the day she would marry and start her own family. She had married. She had started a family. And then Thomas had died of pneumonia last winter, leaving her with 4-year-old Emma and debts she could not possibly pay. How much? Nora asked the shopkeeper, her voice steady despite the breaking of her heart. Mr. Henderson examined the quilt with an appraising eye, spreading it across his counter. His fingers ran over the neat stitches, testing the quality of the fabric. "It is fine work," he admitted. "I can give you $3. $3. It might as well have been $300 for how impossible either sum seemed. But $3 would buy flour, beans, and maybe a bit of salt pork. $3 would keep Emma from crying with hunger for another week or two." After that, Nora did not know what she would do. Her small cabin on the edge of town was already lost, claimed by the bank to settle Thomas's medical bills. They had been living in a lean-to behind the church for the past month, surviving on charity that was running thinner as the summer wore on. "I will take it," Nora said. The transaction was completed in silence. Mr. Henderson counted out the coins with meticulous care while Emma tugged at her mother's skirt. "Mama, I am hungry." "I know, sweetheart. We are going to buy food right now." As Nora gathered the coins, the shop door opened, bringing a gust of hot wind and a tall figure that seemed to fill the entire frame. The man removed his hat as he entered, revealing sun-darkened features and eyes the color of storm clouds. Dust covered his clothes from his boots to his shoulders, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time in a saddle than in civilized company. "Afternoon, Henderson," the stranger said, his voice carrying a pleasant drawl that spoke of Texas roots. "I need supplies for the trail, heading north to Abilene with a herd." "Henry Lawson," Henderson greeted him with considerably more warmth than he had shown Nora. "Heard you were passing through. Your usual order?" "That will do fine." Nora moved to step around the cowboy, eager to purchase her meager supplies and return to the relative shelter of the lean-to before Emma's energy gave out completely. But Emma, with the fearlessness of childhood innocence, looked up at the tall stranger and spoke. "Are you a real cowboy?" The man turned his attention downward, and something in his stern features softened. He crouched down to Emma's level with a fluid motion that spoke of kindness. "I suppose I am. Do you like horses?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "I have never ridden one." "Emma, do not bother the gentleman," Nora said quickly, placing a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. Henry Lawson rose to his full height, which Nora estimated to be well over 6 feet, and met her eyes directly. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a quiet assessment that made her acutely aware of how she must look in her faded dress with her dark hair escaping its simple bun. "No bother at all, madam," he said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. He looked past her to the quilt still spread on Henderson's counter. "That is beautiful work." "Are you the artisan?" "My grandmother made it," Nora replied. Pride and grief warred in her chest. Henderson interjected with the tactlessness of a man who saw only transactions. "The widow here just sold it. Shame to see such quality leave town, but times are hard." Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. She had not wanted her circumstances announced to strangers, had not wanted to be reduced to the widow in casual conversation. But Henderson was right. Times were hard, and they were only getting harder. Henry Lawson was quiet for a moment, his gaze moving from the quilt to Nora to Emma, who had retreated behind her mother's skirts. Something shifted in his expression, a decision being made behind those storm-gray eyes. "How much did you pay for it?" he asked Henderson. $3. "Why, I will give you 6 for it." Henderson's eyes lit with the gleam of easy profit. "Done." "Wait," Nora said, confusion making her voice sharper than intended. "Why would you pay twice what it is worth?" Henry Lawson pulled bills from his pocket and counted out $6 onto the counter. Then he turned to Nora and spoke with quiet sincerity. "Because it is worth that to you, and because I have a feeling your little girl there needs more than just a quilt's worth of security." Before Nora could formulate a response, he continued. "Henderson put the widow's supplies on my account: flour, beans, salt pork, sugar, coffee, and whatever else she needs for a month." "Sir, I cannot accept charity," Nora protested, even as her heart hammered with hope and her pride warred with her desperation. "It is not charity," Henry said. His gray eyes held hers steadily. "I am going to be in town for 3 days organizing my herd before we head north. My men and I will need cooking and mending done. If you are willing to work, I am willing to pay fair wages." It was a kindness disguised as business, and they both knew it. But it was offered with enough dignity that Nora could accept it without feeling diminished. She thought of Emma's hollow cheeks and the way her own dresses hung loose on her frame from months of eating only enough to keep her daughter fed. "I am a good cook," she said, "and I can mend anything. Then we have an arrangement." Henry extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Nora shook it. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but not crushing. "Where can my men find you?" "We are staying behind the church," she admitted, hating the shame that came with the words. Something flickered in his eyes, but his expression remained neutral. "The old boarding house on Main Street has been empty since Mrs. Crawford passed. I will speak to her son about renting rooms for you. Consider it an advance on your wages." "Sir, that is too much." "Henry," he corrected gently. "And it is not too much. It is what is needed." Before Nora could argue further, he turned back to Henderson. "Put the boarding house rent on my account as well, and send word to Jack Crawford that I want those rooms made habitable by sunset." Henderson nodded, already calculating his profits from this unexpected windfall. Henry Lawson picked up the quilt, folded it with surprising care, and handed it back to Nora. "I believe this belongs to you. Consider it the first month's wages." Nora stood holding her grandmother's quilt, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Emma peeked out from behind her skirts, looking up at the tall cowboy with wide eyes. "Thank you," Nora finally managed, and the words felt wholly inadequate for what had just transpired. "No thanks needed. I will send word when my men are ready for their first meal." He settled his hat back on his head and nodded politely. "Madam, little miss." Then he was gone, leaving nothing but dust motes dancing in the shaft of sunlight through the open door and the faint scent of leather and sage. Henderson cleared his throat. "Well, let us get your supplies together, Mrs. Garrett. Mr. Lawson is a man of his word and his credit is good." As the shopkeeper gathered flour and beans and all the other necessities Nora had been doing without, Emma tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, is that man an angel?" Nora looked down at her daughter, and then at the quilt in her arms, soft and familiar and miraculously restored to her. "No, sweetheart. He is just a kind man." But as she walked out of Henderson's store with more food than she had carried in months and the promise of real work and real shelter, Nora could not help but wonder if there was really any difference. The boarding house rooms were indeed ready by sunset. Jack Crawford, a nervous young man who had inherited more property than sense when his mother died, showed them to two clean rooms on the second floor. One held a bed large enough for both Nora and Emma, and the other could serve as a sitting room. There was a shared kitchen on the first floor and a pump in the backyard that brought up clear, cold water. After the lean-to with its dirt floor and leaking roof, the rooms seemed like a palace. Emma ran from corner to corner, delighting in the space and the real glass windows that let in the evening light. Nora set down their few possessions and simply stood in the center of the bedroom, trying to comprehend how drastically their circumstances had changed in a single afternoon. She prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread using the supplies from Henderson's store, and for the first time in recent memory, both she and Emma went to bed with full stomachs. As she lay in the real bed with real sheets, Emma curled warm and safe beside her. Nora allowed herself to cry. Not from grief this time, but from relief so profound it felt like a physical ache. The next morning brought a knock at the door just as Nora finished plaiting Emma's hair. She opened it to find a young cowhand, barely old enough to shave, holding his hat in his hands. "Madam, Mr. Lawson sent me. Said you would be cooking for the outfit. We got about 20 men who need feeding 3 times a day for the next 3 days. Mr. Lawson said to ask what you need." 20 men. 3 meals a day. Nora's mind raced through calculations of quantities and costs. It was a substantial undertaking, but she had fed ranch hands before, back when Thomas was alive and they had briefly worked on a cattle operation outside San Antonio. "I will need someone to help with the heavy lifting and fire tending," she said, "and I will need access to cooking equipment." "Yes, madam. Mr. Lawson figured as much. He is setting up a cook area near the holding pens. He has Dutch ovens, spits, everything you might need. And he said I am to be your assistant along with anyone else you need." "What is your name?" "Billy, madam, Billy Patterson." "All right, Billy. Let us go see this cook area and determine what can be done." The holding pens were on the north edge of town, where the cattle were gathered before the long drive to Abilene. The smell hit Nora first, the earthy scent of livestock mixed with dust and manure. But she had grown up around animals, and the smell did not bother her. What caught her attention was the organized chaos of the operation. Cowboys moved among the cattle with practiced ease, checking hooves and sorting the animals into groups. Henry Lawson stood in the center of it all, his voice carrying clear and authoritative as he directed his men. He had removed his jacket in deference to the heat, and his shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle. He spotted Nora and Emma approaching and walked over, his long stride eating up the distance. "Mrs. Garrett, I hope the rooms were satisfactory." "They are more than satisfactory, thank you." "Good." He gestured to a covered area where someone had already set up a cooking station complete with a large fire pit, Dutch ovens, and work tables. "This is what we have for equipment. If you need anything else, send Billy to town." Nora surveyed the setup with an experienced eye. It was well equipped, better than she had expected. "This will do fine. I will need to start sooner rather than later if you want supper ready by evening." "Whatever you need. Billy here will help with the heavy work, and I will assign another man if necessary." He paused, then added, "I should mention that my men are rough around the edges, but they are good workers and they will treat you with respect. If any of them forget their manners, you tell me immediately." There was steel underneath the polite words, a clear warning that improper behavior would not be tolerated. Nora appreciated it, though she had dealt with rough men before and knew how to maintain appropriate boundaries. "I understand," she said. Emma had been watching the cattle with wide eyes, but now she tugged at Henry's sleeve with the boldness only a child could manage. "Can I see the horses?" Henry looked to Nora for permission. She hesitated, not wanting Emma to be a nuisance, but there was such hope in her daughter's face. "If it is not too much trouble," Nora said. "No trouble at all." Henry crouched down to Emma's level again. "Would you like to meet my horse? His name is Ryder, and he is very gentle." Emma nodded enthusiastically, and Henry offered her his hand. She took it without hesitation, and something about the sight of her small hand in his large one made Nora's chest tighten with an emotion she could not quite name. They walked to where a magnificent buckskin gelding stood tied to a post, and Henry lifted Emma up so she could stroke the horse's nose. Ryder huffed softly, his breath ruffling Emma's hair, and her delighted laughter rang across the holding pens. "He likes you," Henry said, and there was genuine pleasure in his voice. Nora watched them together, this tall cowboy and her tiny daughter, and felt something shift inside her. It had been so long since Emma had known a kind man's attention. Thomas had loved her dearly, but he had been sick for so long before he died, too weak to play or laugh. Before that, there had been good times, but they seemed like distant memories now. "I should get started on the cooking," Nora said, pulling herself back to practical matters. Henry set Emma down gently and turned to face Nora. In the bright morning sunlight, she could see details she had missed in the dim shop the day before. Fine lines crinkled at the corners of his eyes, marks of a man who spent his time squinting into distant horizons. A small scar cut through his left eyebrow. His jaw was strong and clean-shaven, unusual for a man who spent weeks on the trail. "If you need anything at all, you send Billy to fetch me," he said. "I will." He nodded and returned to his work, calling out instructions to his men with easy authority. Nora watched him for a moment longer than necessary before turning to her own tasks. The work was hard but satisfying. She sent Billy to town with a list of ingredients, then began planning meals that would fill hungry men without breaking Henry's budget. Beef was plentiful given the herd, so she planned thick stews, steaks cooked over open flame, and roasts that could feed a crowd. She would make biscuits and cornbread, beans seasoned with salt pork and molasses, and if time permitted, dried apple pies cooked in the Dutch ovens. By the time Billy returned with the supplies, Nora had fires going and water heating. She set him to peeling potatoes while she butchered a side of beef that one of the cowboys had delivered. The work was familiar and grounding, her hands knowing what to do even as her mind wandered. She kept catching glimpses of Henry throughout the morning. He worked alongside his men, never asking them to do anything he would not do himself. When a young cowboy struggled with a particularly stubborn steer, Henry stepped in to help without a word of criticism. When an older hand sat down to rest in the shade, Henry brought him water without being asked. He was a leader who led by example, and Nora found herself respecting that. Thomas had been a good man, but he had never had Henry's quiet confidence. Thomas had been a dreamer, always chasing the next opportunity, the next big plan that would make their fortune. It was what had brought them to Texas in the first place, following a rumor of cheap land and easy money. The reality had been hard work and little profit, and when Thomas fell ill, there had been nothing left to sustain them. Nora pushed away the memories and focused on her cooking. The first meal she served that evening was simple but hearty. Beef stew thick with vegetables, cornbread still steaming from the Dutch oven, and strong coffee that could wake the dead. The cowboys lined up with their tin plates and cups, most of them young men in their 20s, though a few gray, bearded veterans were mixed in. They ate with the single-minded focus of men who burned energy faster than they could replace it, and the compliments were genuine. "Madam, this is the best stew I have had since leaving home," one young cowboy said, and several others murmured agreement. Henry was the last to come through the line, waiting until all his men had been served. Nora filled his plate with extra portions, reasoning that he had paid for it all anyway. "You did not have to wait," she said as she handed him the plate. "Leaders eat last," he replied simply. "It is a rule I learned a long time ago." He found a place to sit on a log near the fire, and Emma, who had been playing quietly with a cloth doll nearby, wandered over to him. Nora tensed, ready to call her daughter back, but Henry shifted to make room for Emma on the log without any apparent concern. "Is the food good?" Emma asked him. "Best I have had in months," Henry replied seriously, as though he were speaking to an adult. "Your mama is a fine cook. She makes really good biscuits, too, with honey." "Does she now? I will have to make sure we get honey for breakfast then." Emma leaned against his shoulder with the easy trust of a child who had decided someone was safe, and Henry did not pull away. He simply continued eating his stew while Emma chattered about her doll and the horses and the big sky overhead. Nora watched them from the cooking area, her hands busy with washing up while her mind churned with emotions she had thought long buried. It was too soon to feel anything beyond gratitude. Too soon and too complicated and too dangerous to her carefully guarded heart. Henry Lawson was passing through town, nothing more. In 3 days, he would drive his cattle north and she would likely never see him again. But knowing that did not stop the warmth spreading through her chest as she watched him listen patiently to her daughter's endless questions. That night, after Emma had been put to bed in their rooms at the boarding house, Nora sat by the window and looked out at the dark street. She could see lights from the saloons and hear distant music and laughter. Eagle Pass was not a large town, but it had all the vices and virtues of any frontier settlement. Good people and bad people, hope and desperation existing side by side. She thought about the quilt, now carefully folded in the trunk at the foot of the bed. Henry had paid twice its value and then returned it to her, a kindness that went beyond simple charity. He had seen her need and met it without diminishing her dignity, and that was a rare gift in a world that seemed designed to grind down anyone who stumbled. Nora knew she should not read too much into his actions. Henry was clearly a good man, the kind who would help anyone in distress. But she could not help remembering the way he had looked at her in Henderson's store, the quiet assessment that had felt like being truly seen for the first time in years. She shook her head, dismissing the thought as foolish. Tomorrow would bring more work, and that was what mattered. Work meant wages, and wages meant survival for her and Emma. Romance was a luxury she could not afford, and certainly not with a man who would be gone before the week was out. But as she lay down to sleep, her last conscious thought was of gray eyes and a gentle voice asking a little girl if she wanted to meet his horse. The second day began before dawn. Nora left Emma sleeping in the care of Mrs. Patterson, Billy's mother, who had generously offered to watch the girl during working hours. By the time the sun broke over the horizon, Nora had biscuits baking and bacon frying, the smell drawing sleepy cowboys from their bedrolls like a dinner bell. Henry appeared as the first coffee finished brewing, his hair still damp from washing at the pump. He looked tired, lines of strain around his eyes suggesting he had not slept much. "Trouble with the herd?" Nora asked as she poured him a cup of coffee. "A few head tried to wander during the night." "Nothing we could not handle, but it meant less sleep for everyone." He took the coffee gratefully and drank it black and scalding hot. "This might be the only thing keeping me upright today. There is plenty more where that came from." The cowboys came through the breakfast line loading their plates with biscuits, bacon, and fried potatoes. Nora had made gravy thick with sausage drippings, and the men poured it over everything with evident satisfaction. She found herself taking pleasure in their appreciation, in the simple act of providing good food for people who needed it. As the breakfast rush slowed, Henry came back for a second cup of coffee. He leaned against the work table, close enough that Nora could smell sage and leather and clean sweat. "I want to thank you properly," he said. "You have gone above and beyond what I expected. I am just doing the work you are paying me for." "No, you are doing considerably more than that. These men have been eating trail rations for weeks. What you are giving them is like coming home." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I know accepting help is hard, especially when your pride has taken a beating, but you should know that hiring you was not just charity. You are genuinely good at this, and my men are better workers when they are well fed." Nora met his eyes, searching for any hint of condescension or pity. She found only sincerity and something else, something warmer that made her pulse quicken. "I appreciate you saying that," she said quietly. "I mean it." He set down his coffee cup and straightened, his expression becoming more businesslike. "I have been thinking about the future. After we deliver this herd to Abilene, I will be coming back through Eagle Pass. I am planning to establish a more permanent operation, running cattle from Texas to the railheads on a regular basis. I will need someone to manage a way station here, someone who can cook for the hands and keep things organized between drives." Nora's heart began to race. "Are you offering me permanent employment?" "I am. The pay would be steady, and I would arrange for proper housing. You could bring Emma, of course. There would be other families around as the operation grows." He met her eyes directly. "I know it is a lot to consider, and you do not have to answer now, but I wanted you to know that there is a future in this if you want it." It was more than Nora had dared hope for. Steady employment, real housing, a chance to build stability for Emma. She should accept immediately, gratefully, without hesitation, but something made her pause. "Why me? You could hire anyone." Henry was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest. "Because you are a hard worker who does not give up even when things are difficult. Because you care about doing things right. And because I would like to see you and Emma have the security you deserve." There was something unspoken underneath the words, something in the way he looked at her that suggested his interest went beyond simple business. Nora felt it like a physical touch, and her body responded with a warmth she had not felt in years. "I would be honored to accept," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. Henry smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his stern features. "Good. That is settled then. We can work out the details when I return from Abilene." He returned to work with the cattle, leaving Nora to process what had just happened. In the span of 2 days, her entire future had changed. She had gone from selling her last possession to survive to having guaranteed employment and housing. It seemed too good to be true, the kind of luck that usually came with hidden strings. But as she watched Henry work throughout the day, she saw no evidence of ulterior motives. He treated her with respect and courtesy, nothing more. If he felt any of the same attraction she was beginning to acknowledge in herself, he gave no inappropriate sign of it. The day passed in a blur of cooking and serving. Nora made a midday meal of roast beef and vegetables, then started preparations for the evening supper. Billy proved to be a capable assistant, learning quickly and working hard. Several of the cowboys stopped by between their duties to thank her for the food, and their genuine appreciation made the hard work worthwhile. Emma arrived in the late afternoon, brought by Mrs. Patterson, who reported that the girl had been well-behaved and helpful. Emma immediately sought out Henry, who was supervising the loading of supplies onto the chuck wagon that would accompany the drive. "Mr. Henry, can I see Ryder again?" Emma asked. Henry glanced at Nora for permission, and she nodded. "Just for a little while. I will need you to help set the table for supper soon." "I will bring her back in time," Henry promised. He took Emma's hand and they walked to where Ryder was tied. Nora watched as he lifted Emma onto the horse's back, keeping a secure hand on her waist while the girl giggled with delight. He led the horse in a slow circle, and Emma's face glowed with pure joy. One of the older cowboys, a grizzled man named Pete, came to stand beside Nora. "He is good with young ones. Had a little sister once before she died of fever. I think your girl reminds him of her." The information added another layer to Nora's understanding of Henry. "How long have you worked for him?" "Going on 5 years now." "He is the best boss I have ever had, and I have worked for more than a few. Fair, honest, does not ask more than he is willing to give himself." Pete spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Also does not tolerate any nonsense. Saw him fire a man once for being rough with the horses. Paid him his wages and sent him packing the same day. He seems like a good man." "He is. And he does not look at women the way he has been looking at you unless there is genuine interest there. Just thought you should know." Pete tipped his hat and walked away before Nora could formulate a response. She stood frozen, watching Henry with Emma, and allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been trying to ignore. She was attracted to him. More than attracted. In just 2 days, he had awakened something in her that she had thought died with Thomas. Hope. The possibility of not just survival but happiness. It terrified her. That evening's supper was another success. Nora had made a beef roast seasoned with wild herbs, baked beans rich with molasses, and apple pie that made the hardened cowboys groan with pleasure. She served the meal as the sun set, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too vivid to be real. Henry ate with his men, but Nora noticed he kept glancing toward the cooking area where she worked. Each time their eyes met, he would nod slightly, a private acknowledgement that felt intimate despite the crowd around them. After the meal, while Billy cleaned the dishes and most of the men settled around the fire to smoke and tell stories, Henry approached Nora with Emma half asleep in his arms. "She fell asleep watching the horses," he said softly. "I did not want to wake her." Nora felt her heart constrict at the sight of her daughter curled trustingly against his broad chest. "Thank you. I will take her back to the boarding house. Let me walk with you. It is getting dark." They walked through the quiet streets of Eagle Pass, Emma breathing softly between them. The saloons were just beginning to come alive with their nightly noise, but the residential areas were peaceful. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Crickets sang their endless song. "Tell me about your husband," Henry said quietly, "if it is not too painful." Nora was surprised by the request, but something about the darkness and the sleeping child made honesty easier. Thomas was a good man, but not a practical one. He always thought the next opportunity would be the one that changed everything. "We moved here from Missouri chasing rumors of cheap land." The reality was harder than he expected. "How long were you married?" 5 years. The last year was mostly him being sick and me trying to keep us afloat." She paused, then added, "I loved him, but it was not the grand passion poets write about. We were friends who built a life together. When he died, I mourned him, but I also felt relieved, and the guilt of that relief has been eating at me ever since." "Guilt serves no purpose except to make us suffer," Henry said. "Thomas would not want you to carry it." "How can you know that?" "Because any man worth the name would want his wife and daughter to be happy, even after he is gone. Especially after he is gone." They reached the boarding house, and Henry carried Emma up the stairs to the room Nora unlocked. He laid the child gently on the bed, stepping back so Nora could remove Emma's shoes and cover her with a blanket. in the lamplit room with Emma safe and sleeping and this kind man standing a respectful distance away, Nora felt something break open inside her. All the fear and exhaustion and loneliness she had been holding back came flooding through, and before she could stop herself, she was crying. Henry moved without hesitation, pulling her into his arms and holding her while she sobbed against his chest. He did not speak, did not offer empty platitudes. He simply held her, one hand stroking her hair with infinite gentleness. When the storm finally passed, Nora pulled back, mortified by her loss of control. "I am so sorry. I do not know what came over me." "You have been carrying too much for too long," Henry said. His gray eyes were warm with understanding. "There is no shame in crying. I have made a mess of your shirt. Shirts can be washed." He smiled slightly. "I am just glad you felt safe enough to let go. Safe." Yes, that was exactly what she felt with him. Safe in a way she had not felt since before Thomas got sick, maybe not even then. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. Not just the work, but the kindness. I had forgotten what it felt like to be treated with genuine consideration." Nora. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her shiver. "I want to be honest with you about something. I did not hire you just because you needed work. I hired you because from the moment I saw you in Henderson's store, I could not stop thinking about you." Her breath caught. "Henry, I know it is too soon. I know you are still grieving and finding your feet, but when I come back from Abilene, I would like permission to court you properly. Not as your employer, but as a man interested in a remarkable woman." He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You do not have to answer now. Just think about it." Nora looked up into his face at the honesty and hope written there and felt her own hope rising to meet it. "I will think about it," she promised. He nodded, satisfied with that, and left her standing in the doorway of her room with her heart racing and her future suddenly full of possibilities she had not dared imagine. The third day dawned with a different energy. The herd was ready, the supplies were packed, and Henry's men were preparing for the long drive to Abilene. Nora cooked an enormous breakfast, knowing the cowboys would be eating trail rations soon enough. She made everything they loved best: biscuits and gravy, fried steak, eggs and potatoes. The men ate with genuine sadness that the good food would be ending, and several of them thanked Nora profusely for spoiling them. Billy looked nearly tearful at the prospect of returning to his regular chores now that his temporary position was ending. "You did good work," Nora told him. "Your mother should be proud. Will you really be here when Mr. Lawson comes back?" Billy asked hopefully. "I will be here." Henry was busy with final preparations most of the morning, but he found time to come say goodbye to Emma. He had something hidden behind his back, and when Emma ran up to him, he revealed it with a flourish. It was a small wooden horse, beautifully carved and smooth to satin softness. "I made this for you," he said, crouching down to her level. "So you will have a horse of your own until you are big enough to ride a real one." Emma took the gift with wonder, her small hands running over the carved mane and tail. "It is beautiful. Thank you, Mr. Henry. You are very welcome, little miss." He glanced up at Nora, and the tenderness in his expression made her chest tight. "You take care of your mama while I am gone, all right?" "I will," Emma promised solemnly. Henry stood and faced Nora, and suddenly the busy camp around them seemed very far away. "I will be back in about 6 weeks, depending on weather and how the drive goes. Jack Crawford has instructions to make sure you have everything you need while I am gone, and Henderson knows to extend you credit at my account. You have already done more than enough. I have done what is right." He paused, then added quietly, "I am going to be thinking about you every day I am gone. Henry, Nora did not know how to finish the sentence. There was so much she wanted to say, but the words tangled in her throat. He saved her from having to continue. "I know. Just promise me you will be here when I get back." "I promise." He reached out and took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and utterly sincere. The brush of his mouth against her knuckles sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "Until I return," he said. Then he was mounting Ryder and calling orders to his men, and the camp dissolved into organized chaos as the drive began. Nora stood with Emma and watched as Henry led his herd north, dust rising in clouds that eventually obscured everything. When they were finally gone and the holding pen stood empty and quiet, Emma tugged at her mother's skirt. "Mama, is Mr. Henry coming back for real?" "Yes, sweetheart, he is coming back. Good, I like him. He is nice." "He is very nice," Nora agreed. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, and Nora tried to imagine the next 6 weeks stretching ahead without Henry's presence. Already she missed him, which seemed impossible given how short a time they had known each other. But the heart did not measure time in days and hours. The heart measured in moments of connection, in kindness freely given, in the way someone made you feel seen and valued. By that measurement, Nora had known Henry for much longer than 3 days. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Nora took work where she could find it, cooking for the hotel dining room and taking in washing and mending. The wages Henry had paid her were carefully hoarded, a cushion against future uncertainty. Jack Crawford proved to be as good as Henry's word, ensuring the boarding house rent was paid, and that Nora had access to credit at Henderson's store. Emma thrived with regular meals and stable housing. She grew stronger and livelier, making friends with other children in town and spending hours playing with her wooden horse. The hollow look left her eyes, and Nora felt a weight lift from her shoulders seeing her daughter healthy and happy. But at night, when Emma was asleep, Nora would sit by the window and think about Henry. She wondered where he was, whether the drive was going smoothly, whether he was thinking of her as he had promised. She found herself remembering small details, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle strength of his hands, the rumble of his voice when he spoke quietly. She thought about his proposal to court her and tried to examine her feelings honestly. Was she attracted to Henry himself, or was she simply grateful for his help? Was this real affection, or was she confusing security with love? But every time she asked herself these questions, she remembered the way her heart had raced when he looked at her. The way his touch had sent shivers through her body. The way she felt safe and seen and valued in his presence. That was not gratitude. That was attraction, genuine and powerful and terrifying in its intensity. Nora had loved Thomas in a quiet, comfortable way. What she felt for Henry was anything but quiet. It was a thunderstorm, electric and dangerous and impossible to ignore. She wondered if he felt the same intensity or if his interest was milder. She wondered what it would be like to be courted by him, to see where this attraction might lead. She wondered if she was brave enough to open her heart again when the last time had ended in such pain and struggle. The questions kept her awake many nights, but underneath them all was a growing certainty. When Henry returned, she was going to say yes. 6 weeks and 2 days after the drive had departed, a rider came into town with news that Henry's outfit was camped 10 miles south. They would arrive in Eagle Pass the next day. Nora received the news from Henderson, who seemed to take great pleasure in delivering it. "Mr. Lawson sent word that he would like to see you as soon as he arrives," Henderson said with a knowing look. Nora thanked him and went home to prepare. She washed her hair and pressed her best dress, the dark blue one that Thomas had bought her for their 2nd anniversary. It was old but well made, and it fit her better now that she had regained some of the weight she had lost during the hardest times. She plaited Emma's hair with special care and tried not to let her daughter see how nervous she was. But Emma, with a child's uncanny perception, looked up at her mother and said, "You look pretty, Mama. Mr. Henry will like it." "Thank you, sweetheart." "Are you going to marry Mr. Henry?" The question, delivered with such casual directness, took Nora by surprise. "What makes you ask that?" "Because you smile when you talk about him, and he smiles when he talks about you. That is what people do when they are going to get married." Nora knelt down to her daughter's level. "Would you be all right with that, if Mr. Henry and I did get married someday?" Emma considered the question with great seriousness. "Yes, he is nice and he gave me a horse and he makes you happy. Those are good reasons." Out of the mouths of children, Nora thought. "Well, we are not getting married yet. He just wants to court me, which means spending time together to see if we are suited." "You are suited," Emma said with absolute certainty. "I can tell." Nora hugged her daughter, taking comfort in Emma's unconditional support. Whatever happened with Henry, at least she would have her daughter's blessing. The next afternoon, Henry rode into Eagle Pass at the head of his outfit. The men looked tired and dusty from the long journey, but there was an air of satisfaction about them. The drive had clearly been successful. Nora stood on the porch of the boarding house and watched them come, her heart hammering against her ribs. Henry spotted her almost immediately, and even from a distance, she could see his face light up with a smile. He dismounted Ryder with fluid grace and walked toward her, closing the distance with long strides. Nora met him at the bottom of the porch steps, suddenly shy despite everything. "Hello, Nora," he said, and his voice was warm and rough with emotion. "Hello, Henry. Welcome back." "It is good to be back." He looked at her as though committing every detail to memory. "You look beautiful." "You look tired," he laughed, the sound genuine and delighted. "I am exhausted, but seeing you has made every mile worth it. Mr. Henry." Emma came barreling out of the boarding house and launched herself at him without hesitation. He caught her easily, swinging her up into his arms. "Hello, little miss. Did you take care of your mama like I asked?" "Yes. And Mama took care of me too. We have been doing real good." "I can see that." "You have grown at least an inch," Emma giggled. "Have not. It has only been 6 weeks." "Has it really? It felt like 6 months." He set Emma down and turned his attention back to Nora. "I need to see to my men and the horses, but after that may I call on you? I would like to talk." "I would like that too." He nodded, satisfied, and returned to his work, but he kept glancing back at her, and each look sent a fresh wave of warmth through her body. That evening, Henry appeared at her door freshly washed and dressed in clean clothes. He had even trimmed his beard, and he held his hat in his hands with an almost boyish nervousness that was endearing. "I thought we might take a walk," he suggested, "if that would be agreeable." Nora had already arranged for Mrs. Patterson to watch Emma, anticipating this invitation. "That would be very agreeable." They walked through the quiet streets as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. For a while neither spoke, simply enjoying the easy comfort of each other's presence. Finally, Henry broke the silence. The drive was successful. "We got a good price in Abilene, and I have enough capital now to establish the permanent operation I mentioned. I have already put down payments on land near Eagle Pass for a way station, and on property north of here for another station. The plan is to run regular drives with organized stops where the men can rest and resupply." "That sounds ambitious." "It is, but I am tired of drifting. I want to build something lasting, something I can be proud of." He glanced at her. "I want a home, Nora, a real home with roots and family." "I have been alone for too long." Nora's pulse quickened. "What happened to make you alone?" Henry was quiet for a moment, his jaw working as he decided how much to share. My parents died when I was 17. Cholera epidemic. I had a younger sister, Caroline. She was only 8. I did my best to take care of her, but I was young and did not know what I was doing. She died of fever the winter I turned 18. Oh, Henry, I am so sorry. It was a long time ago, but it shaped who I became. I swore I would never be helpless again, never be unable to provide or protect. That is why I have worked so hard to build capital and skills, so I would never have to watch someone I love suffer because I could not help them. He stopped walking and turned to face her. When I saw you in Henderson's store, trying to sell your last valuable possession to feed your daughter, I saw myself at 18, desperate and proud and barely holding on. I could not walk away. Is that all it was? Recognition of a shared experience? At first, maybe. But it became something more almost immediately. You are strong, Nora. You have been knocked down by life, but you have not stayed down. You keep fighting for your daughter and for yourself. That kind of strength is rare and precious. Nora felt tears pricking her eyes. I do not feel strong. Most days I feel like I am barely keeping my head above water. That is exactly what strength is, not the absence of struggle, but the refusal to give up despite it. He reached out and gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. I meant what I said before I left. I want to court you, Nora. I want the chance to show you that you do not have to fight alone anymore. I want that too, Nora whispered. I have been thinking about you every day since you left, about what you offered and what it might mean, and I realized that I am tired of being afraid. Tired of protecting my heart so fiercely that I forget how to live. Henry's eyes blazed with hope and something deeper, something that made Nora's breath catch. Does that mean yes? Yes, Henry. You may court me. He smiled then, a brilliant expression that transformed his entire face. I promise to make you glad of that decision. Then he kissed her, and the world fell away. His lips were gentle at first, asking permission even though she had already given it. But when Nora leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of hunger and longing and hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Henry rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that since the first time I saw you. I am glad you waited until now. I was not ready before. And now I am ready to try. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, and Nora felt as though she were floating. When they reached her door, Henry kissed her again, a brief, sweet touch that promised more to come. Tomorrow I will start building the way station, he said, and I would like you to help design the kitchen facilities. This will be your domain after all. I would like that. Good night, Nora. Good night, Henry. She watched him walk away into the darkness, then went inside to find Emma already asleep and Mrs. Patterson knitting in the sitting room. He is a good man, Mrs. Patterson said without looking up from her knitting. Treats you well, very well. Then you hold on to him. Good men are rare as hen's teeth out here. Nora could only agree. The next months unfolded like a dream. Henry spent his days working on the way station, hiring local men to help with construction. Nora worked alongside him, planning the kitchen layout and organizing supplies. It was hard work but satisfying, watching the buildings take shape, and knowing she was helping to create something lasting. In the evenings, Henry would come to the boarding house and they would sit on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his years working cattle, the places he had seen, the things he had learned. She told him about her childhood in Virginia, about marrying Thomas and the hopes they had shared, about the grief of losing him. They talked about their dreams for the future. Henry wanted to expand the operation eventually, establishing a network of way stations that would make cattle drives safer and more profitable. Nora wanted to create a real home for Emma, a place of stability and love where her daughter could grow up strong and confident. And they talked about their feelings for each other, which grew deeper with each passing day. Henry courted her with a quiet intensity that left no doubt about his intentions. He brought her wildflowers picked on his rides. He carved toys for Emma. He fixed things around the boarding house without being asked. He showed his love through actions as much as words. Nora found herself falling for him with a completeness that both thrilled and terrified her. This was not the comfortable affection she had felt for Thomas. This was passion and partnership, a love that challenged her to be her best self while accepting her exactly as she was. 3 months after Henry's return from Abilene, he proposed. They were at the way station site, watching the sun set over the half-finished buildings. Emma was playing nearby, chasing a butterfly through the tall grass. "Nora," Henry said, taking her hands in his, "these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You have given me something I thought I would never have, a future worth building. I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it." He knelt down, producing a simple gold band from his pocket. "Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and partner and the mother of my children? Will you build this life with me?" Nora looked down at him, this strong, gentle man who had appeared in her darkest hour and brought light back into her world. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, and Emma's delighted laughter carried across the prairie as she ran to join them. They married in October of 1878 in the small church in Eagle Pass. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, attended by Henry's men, townspeople who had become friends, and Emma, who took her role as flower girl with utmost seriousness. Nora wore a new dress, pale green with lace at the collar, purchased with money from her work at the way station. Henry wore a black suit that made his gray eyes look like storm clouds. When they exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives, there was not a dry eye in the church. The reception was held at the newly completed way station, which now boasted a full kitchen, dining hall, and living quarters for Nora, Henry, and Emma. The Cowboys had barbecued beef, and everyone brought dishes to share. There was music and dancing and toasts to the happy couple. As the evening wore on and Emma fell asleep on a bench, Henry and Nora slipped away to walk under the stars. He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I have ever been." "Good. I plan to keep you that way. Henry, can I ask you something? Anything? That first day in Henderson's store when you saw me selling the quilt, what did you really see?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I saw a woman who reminded me of myself at my lowest point. But more than that, I saw someone who deserved better than what life had dealt her. I saw beauty and strength and grace under pressure." He tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "And I saw the woman I was going to spend the rest of my life loving, even though I did not fully realize it at the time." Nora kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she said, "You bought us both a future that day. You know that, don't you?" "We bought each other a future," Henry corrected. "You gave me something just as valuable as what I gave you. You gave me a reason to build instead of just survive. You gave me love and family and home." They stood together under the vast Texas sky, holding each other as the stars wheeled overhead, and Nora knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Life at the way station settled into a comfortable rhythm. Nora managed the kitchen and hospitality side of the operation, cooking for the Cowboys who came through on cattle drives, and managing the supplies needed to keep everything running. Henry oversaw the business side, organizing the drives and establishing the network of way stations he had envisioned. Emma thrived in the open spaces of the prairie. She learned to ride under Henry's patient instruction, starting on a gentle mare named Daisy that he bought specifically for her. She helped Nora in the kitchen and followed Henry around the corrals, asking endless questions about cattle and horses and the business of ranching. Henry proved to be a wonderful stepfather, treating Emma as though she were his own blood. He was patient with her questions, gentle with her fears, and firm when discipline was needed. Nora watched him with her daughter and fell more in love with him every day. Their marriage was passionate and tender, filled with laughter and occasional arguments, but always anchored by deep respect and affection. Henry was an attentive husband, never taking Nora for granted, and always showing his appreciation for her work and partnership. Nora bloomed under his love, becoming more confident and assured as the months passed. In the spring of 1879, Nora discovered she was pregnant. She told Henry one evening after Emma had gone to bed, suddenly nervous about how he would react. They had talked about having children together, but talking was different from the reality. But when she gave him the news, Henry's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing with joy. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "You are happy?" Nora asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. Happy does not begin to cover it. He set her down gently, his hands moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "I am going to be a father, a real father this time, there from the beginning." "You are already a real father to Emma. I know, and I love her as my own, but this—" He trailed off, seemingly unable to find words big enough for his feelings. Nora understood. This pregnancy represented new life growing from their love, a tangible symbol of the future they were building together. When they told Emma she was going to be a big sister, the little girl's reaction was pure delight. "Can we name the baby Horse?" she asked seriously. Henry laughed so hard he had to sit down. "I do not think that is a traditional name, little miss. But I like horses. How about we wait and see if the baby is a boy or a girl first, and then we can all decide on a name together," Nora suggested. Emma agreed to this compromise, and for the next months, she spent considerable time suggesting increasingly creative names, most of them related to animals or things she found on the prairie. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Nora worked as long as she was able, then gradually turned over more responsibilities to the assistants Henry hired to help her. He was endlessly solicitous, bringing her pillows and making sure she did not overexert herself. It was sweet, if occasionally overwhelming. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him when he tried to insist she stop walking to the chicken coop to collect eggs. "I know, but you are precious to me, and so is that baby. Let me take care of you." How could she argue with that? So she let him fuss and enjoyed the attention, recognizing it for what it was, love expressed through action. In December of 1879, Nora went into labor on a cold, clear morning. The midwife from town was summoned, and Henry paced the floors like a caged animal while Emma stayed with Mrs. Patterson in town. The labor was long but not unusually difficult. As the sun set on the shortest day of the year, Nora gave birth to a healthy baby boy with his father's gray eyes and a head of dark hair. When Henry was finally allowed into the room, he approached the bed with something like awe on his face. Nora held out the bundle and he took his son with shaking hands. "He is perfect," Henry whispered, staring down at the tiny face. "He looks like you. He is going to be tall. Look at those hands." Henry glanced up at Nora, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Thank you for this gift." "What should we name him?" Nora asked. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, the answer seemed obvious. "What about Thomas?" Henry suggested gently. "After your first husband, he gave you Emma, and Emma is precious. It seems right to honor his memory." Nora felt tears slip down her cheeks. It was a generous gesture, acknowledging that her past was part of what made her who she was, not something to be erased or forgotten. "Thomas Henry," she said. "Thomas Henry Lawson. It is a good, strong name." When Emma finally met her baby brother, she stared at him with wide eyes for a long moment. Then she carefully touched his tiny hand and said, "I still think Horse would have been better, but Thomas is okay." The adults laughed, and Emma looked pleased to have made them happy. The years that followed were full and rich. The way station business prospered, becoming one of the most reliable stopping points for cattle drives heading north. Henry's reputation for fair dealing and quality service spread, and soon they were turning away business for lack of capacity. They expanded gradually, adding more buildings and hiring more staff. Nora trained other women to help with the cooking, creating employment opportunities for widows and struggling families in Eagle Pass. It felt good to offer others the kind of help she had once received. Emma grew into a confident and capable young woman, helping with the business and learning both the hospitality and ranching sides of the operation. Thomas proved to be a cheerful child with his father's calm temperament and his mother's determination. 2 years after Thomas's birth, Nora had another baby, a daughter they named Caroline after Henry's lost sister. The baby had Nora's dark curls and Henry's gray eyes, and Henry openly wept when he held her for the first time. "I never thought I would have another Caroline in my life," he said. "This feels like a gift from God." Life was not without challenges. There were hard winters and drought years. Cowboys occasionally caused trouble, and once they had to deal with a small outbreak of fever among the hired hands. But they faced each challenge together, their partnership growing stronger with every test. Nora sometimes thought back to that day in Henderson's store, when she had sold her last quilt to buy food for Emma. It seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than a decade. She was a different person now, shaped by love and partnership into someone stronger and more confident than she could have imagined. The quilt itself held pride of place on the bed she shared with Henry. It had survived everything and represented not just her past, but also her present and future. Every time she looked at the interlocking wedding rings, she thought about the endless promise of unity and felt grateful for the second chance at love she had been given. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, Henry gave her a gift. It was a new quilt, this one sewn by women Nora had employed over the years. Each square represented a different woman's story, their gratitude sewn into the fabric in the form of carefully chosen patterns and colors. "They wanted you to have this," Henry explained as Nora unfolded the beautiful work. "As a thank you for everything you have done for them, but also as a symbol of what you have built here. This way station is not just a business, it is a community and you are at the heart of it." Nora traced the patterns with her fingers, recognizing the work of women she had trained and helped and befriended. Each square represented a life touched, a family supported, a future made possible. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Not as beautiful as you." Henry pulled her close, and even after 10 years of marriage, his touch still sent shivers through her. "Thank you for saying yes to that first offer of work. Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy with more hope than sense. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for giving Emma and me a future when we had none." She kissed him softly. "Thank you for loving me. Easiest thing I have ever done." They stood together in the home they had built, surrounded by evidence of the life they had created, and Nora knew without doubt that she was exactly where she belonged. The children grew and thrived. Emma eventually married a young rancher named Samuel Morris, and they settled on land adjacent to the way station. She and Samuel had 4 children of their own, making Nora and Henry grandparents while still in their prime. Thomas showed a talent for business and took over more of the way station operations as Henry gradually stepped back. He was fair and capable, earning the respect of the Cowboys and staff through his own merit rather than simply being the boss's son. Caroline was the wild one, insisting on learning to rope and ride as well as any boy. She scandalized some of the more traditional townspeople by wearing split skirts and working cattle alongside her brother. But she was happy and confident, and that was what mattered to Nora and Henry. They had 2 more children in the years that followed, another son named William and a daughter named Grace. The house was always full of noise and laughter, of children's questions and the daily drama of family life. Nora sometimes wondered what her life would have been like if Henry had not walked into Henderson's store that day. Would she and Emma have survived? Probably, somehow. But it would have been a life of grinding poverty and endless struggle, not this abundance of love and purpose. She thought about Thomas sometimes, her first husband, and hoped he would be happy knowing Emma had grown up surrounded by love and opportunity. He had been a good man, even if not a practical one, and he deserved to be remembered kindly. But her life now was with Henry, and it was more than she had ever dreamed possible. He was her partner in every sense, sharing the work and the worry and the joy of their expanding family and business. They had built something lasting together, something that would continue long after they were gone. As the new century approached, Henry and Nora sat on the porch of the way station they had built together, watching the sun set over the Texas prairie. Their children and grandchildren were scattered across the property, the sounds of their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "You ever regret it?" Nora asked suddenly. "Taking on a widow and her daughter when you could have had an easier life?" Henry turned to look at her, and even after all these years, the love in his eyes made her breath catch. "Not for a single moment. You and Emma, you gave my life meaning. Everything I have built, everything I have become, it is because you took a chance on a cowboy with a dream. You saved us, Henry. We saved each other." He took her hand, his thumb tracing the simple gold band she still wore. "I was drifting before you, just going through the motions. You gave me a reason to put down roots. You gave me a home." Nora leaned her head against his shoulder, watching their grandchildren play in the fading light. "We built a good life, the best life." And as the stars began to emerge in the vast Texas sky, Nora thought about the quilt she had sold and the cowboy who had bought them both a future. She thought about how one moment of kindness could change everything, how love could grow even in the hardest soil, how hope could survive even the darkest times. She thought about the family they had created, the business they had built, the community they had fostered. It had all started with a simple transaction in a dusty shop, but it had become something so much larger, a legacy of love, a promise of continuity, a future built on the foundation of compassion and courage. "I love you," she said to Henry, words she had spoken countless times but which never lost their meaning. "I love you too," he replied, pulling her closer. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after." And that, Nora thought as contentment settled over her like a warm blanket, was the truest thing she knew. Their love had started in desperation and grown into something unshakable. It had weathered every storm and celebrated every triumph. It had created life and purpose and joy. The quilt had been sold to feed a hungry child, but the cowboy who bought it had given them so much more than food. He had given them hope, security, and love. He had given them a future filled with possibility, and Nora had given him the same in return. As night fell over Eagle Pass, Texas, Henry and Nora Lawson sat together on their porch, hands intertwined, hearts full, surrounded by the life they had built together. Behind them stood the way station, solid and enduring, a testament to what could be achieved through love and partnership. Before them stretched the prairie, vast and eternal, holding the promise of tomorrow. And between them flowed a love that had started with a simple act of kindness and grown into something extraordinary. A love that had built a future neither could have imagined alone. A love that would last for all their days and echo through the generations that would come after. The end of their story was not an ending at all, but rather a continuation. Their children would carry forward the values they had instilled, the legacy they had created. The way station would continue to serve travelers for decades to come. The community they had fostered would grow and thrive. And somewhere in Eagle Pass, in a house full of love and laughter, a quilt with interlocking wedding rings would rest on a bed, a reminder of where it all began. Of a widow who sold her last possession to feed her daughter, of a cowboy who bought them both a future, and of the love that had transformed desperation into abundance, loneliness into family, and survival into a life worth living. This was their story, and it was complete. Not because their lives had ended, but because every question had been answered, every struggle had been resolved, and every heart had found its home. Henry and Nora would live many more years together, growing old side by side, watching their children and grandchildren flourish, tending the legacy they had built with such care. They would face the challenges of age with the same partnership that had carried them through everything else. And when their time finally came, many years in the future, they would leave behind not just property and possessions, but something far more valuable. A story of redemption and love that would be told and retold by their descendants for generations. The story of how a widow's last quilt became the first thread in a tapestry of abundant life. How a cowboy's kindness became the foundation of a family dynasty. How two broken people found each other in the wilderness and created something whole and beautiful and lasting. This was their happily ever after, earned through courage and kindness, built on love and trust, and sustained by the simple truth that sometimes, when we open our hearts to possibility, we find exactly what we have been searching for all along. In Eagle Pass, Texas, under the vast sky of the American West, Henry Lawson and Nora Garrett Lawson lived and loved and thrived. They raised their children with wisdom and warmth. They built a business that served their community. They created a home that welcomed all who entered. And they proved, day after day and year after year, that love can triumph over adversity, that kindness can change lives, and that sometimes the most desperate moments can become the doorway to the greatest blessings. Their story was complete, their love assured, their future secured not just in property and possessions, but in the hearts and minds of everyone they had touched. And the quilt with its interlocking rings remained, a silent witness to the promise that two people had made to each other. To love, to cherish, to build a life together that would honor the past while embracing the future. A future that had started with a simple transaction and become something extraordinary, a future built on hope, sustained by love and crowned with joy, their future. Together, always.